Welcome here to the Outer Circle Inner Stillness, conversations and reflections about the intersections of spirituality, sobriety, and the sober way of life. And I am delighted to have Patti Clark in the studio as my guest today to talk about recovery, women in recovery, assorted books in learning and wisdom, and whatever else we discover along the way,
Whatever
because
else we discover. Exactly.
I am not an outliner. I am very much a discovery writer. So anyway,
Perfect.
yes. Nice to meet you, Patti. Glad you could be here.
Nice to meet you too. I've been enjoying your podcast and feel like I've gotten to know you. So I've been looking forward to this.
Cool. Well, thank you. What would you be able to the listener who doesn't know about you, what's your corner of the recovery world, the spiritual world, the counseling, mental health recovery world?
All that.
Yeah.
So my corner of the world is actually shifted on axis recently. We just moved to Portugal recently. For the past 30 years, I've been living in New Zealand, and that's where I was doing workshops for women and doing personal growth, self-help kind of workshops. I first got sober though in the States. You can hear my accent. I got sober in Tucson, Arizona in 1988, just before my 30th birthday. And then after I moved to New Zealand, I decided that that I was good. I was recovered. I was all good. I didn't need it anymore. But I still said the third step prayer every morning. So I thought I was just fine. And I decided I could drink again, and I was sober for about 13 years, went out and drank again for about 12 and a half years, and got sober again 10 years ago in 2014. And that was in New Zealand. And then recently, as I said, we moved to Portugal because our two adult sons are living in Europe. Our older son is in Switzerland. Our younger son is in Scotland. And they both said, we really want you guys closer. And any parent, that's what you want to hear. So we moved to Portugal. But at this very moment, I am in Switzerland with my older son, his wife, and our grandson. So that's my corner of the world, sort of encompassing much of the world.
Yeah, it's a big corner. But yeah, that's super fun. We have some good friends that live part-time in Switzerland, part-time in Italy.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah. They their Instagram feed is really delightful. So,
Excellent. Well,
yeah.
your name, Passimio. Passimio sounds very Italian.
It's funny you should say that. Everybody does. My mom was Italian, but my dad's actually from the Philippines.
Oh,
So,
really? Okay.
so Pasimio, I guess, is Tagalog. Um, unless there's like some Italian somewhere in the ancestry,
Could
which
be.
who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a lot of Spanish
There
in
is.
the Philippines, so maybe there's that lenient. But my
Yeah,
mother's Italian as well. My mother was Italian as
very
well.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that a little bit. So you've been working at recovery on and off for like we got 30 plus years then.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got sober 2 days before my 30th birthday. I was sober until I was almost 43, and then we moved to a small town in New Zealand. They weren't doing it right, and so I quit going to meetings, and just uh, that's a long story that we can go down that path if we
Yeah.
decide to. But what I found after 12 years of being out drinking again, controlling it, was that I didn't like myself anymore when I was drinking. I mean, it really was. When I got sober the first time, my mother died of alcoholism, and so when I got old enough to be thinking about having my own kids, when I was about to turn 30, I thought, I am not going to be my mother. I am going to be a better mother. And so I got sober to be a better mother. I got sober to be a better partner with my partner who became my husband, to be better to a lot of people outside myself. And I got sober. I was sober through pregnancies, through breastfeeding, through getting my kids into school, and then sort of looked around and thought, I wasn't feeling it anymore, right? Quote unquote.
Mhm.
Um, so I went out again, and I really realized I don't like myself drinking. I'm not comfortable in my body. It's that really, I really felt that whole feeling of, um, I kept wanting to escape myself. So, and I'm a great addict. I'm an addict on so many levels
Mhm.
that, it's not just alcohol, anything to escape. So I realized that I wanted to get to a place where I was loving myself for who I was. So the
Mhm.
second time I got sober in 2014, I got sober for me. I got
Mhm.
sober because I wanted to be sober. I wanted to feel good about myself and strong within myself.
Mm. I wonder if you could say more about that, because you had two major movements of sobriety with a long interval. And one difference sounds like kind of the core motivation, doing it to avoid mom versus doing it to connect to yourself.
Exactly.
Can you say more? What were some of the compare and contrast the two? What were different about the two periods?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, actually, and one that I don't think about that much, even though they really were different. They really were. When I got sober the first time in Tucson, I found a group of women about my age, really cool, and I was exploring things on a different level. I was doing a lot of therapy. I was doing starting to look at the world differently, starting to explore spirituality. I was raised Catholic in a very dysfunctional Catholic family. One of my favorite stories with Catholicism, I'll go off on a tangent here just for a moment, is that my father quit going to church with my mother and my sister and I. And so my mother would take us to church, and he said he would go to church at the 6 o'clock mass. So we would go to church in the morning. And then after a while, my mother said, I'm just going to sit in the car and read. You girls go into church, my sister and I. My sister's 4 years older than me. So we'd go into church and sit together in the back. And then after a while, my sister, as I said, was 4 years older, said, I'm going to sit in the car and read too. So I would walk into church alone. I think I was 7, 8. Finally, I just said, this is crazy. So I started bringing books with me into the car, and my mother would drive us to the church. We'd sit in the parking lot, and the three of us would read in the parking lot, and we would go home so that my mother could say, I took the girls to church. So it wasn't a lie. And so, at that point, even though I'm 7, 8, 9 years old, the hypocrisy was screaming at me. And so I thought, this is not what I want. I went to catechism and for First Holy Communion and for confirmation. And we were taught to sit on half of our seat so our guardian angel could sit down on the other half. And if we didn't, the nuns told us, then we were not being kind, helpful. We didn't care about our guardian angels. We weren't being good Catholics. That kind of thing that's just, looking back, crazy. And so I grew up being scared of God. I grew up being um, uncomfortable in my skin around that aspect of spirituality. So the reason I tell that story is because that first soiree into sobriety, my first sponsor, Nancy, whom I adore still, um, taught me to fire that God that I had been introduced to and to create a God of my understanding, a higher power of my understanding that loved me and that I felt comfortable with. And so that was how I learned to get back into spirituality. And I did a lot of counseling, and I learned more about fitting into my own skin. And I was a teacher. When I got to New Zealand, I was running workshops for teenagers, and um, I was raising two kids, and my kids went off to school, and the other mothers that I was hanging out with were we lived on the beach, and the mothers would get together after school, and all the kids would play, and the mothers were all drinking great wine. And I hadn't found my niche in the recovery community there because, as I say, in Tucson, they were these young, vibrant women. I got to this small town in New Zealand, and it was mostly older, pedantic, big, big book thumping men who, when I cried and said I was lonely, confused, didn't fit, would say, put a plug in the jug, cover your mouth, listen with your two ears, shut up, come to meetings, you'll be fine. And I kept saying, but I'm not.
Mm.
And I didn't find my space. So I thought, well, I know where I can feel more comfortable in my skin. It's like the allure never really leaves if you let that little thing sort of crawl up on your shoulder.
Mm.
And so I started drinking again and being part of that. So the second part into it was me looking at, okay, I want to do this for me, but I have to learn to be comfortable within myself, be comfortable in my life, so I don't want to escape it. So I don't want to escape it through alcohol, drugs, screens, food, sex, whatever any of us addicts find. And so that's what I started exploring my second time around. And I'm grateful beyond measure that I met a woman in my small town in New Zealand. And I said, I need a meeting that she was in recovery. I need a meeting, but I need one that's going to be a lot more embracing and a lot more open and encompassing about emotional sobriety and about loving beyond just not drinking, because that's what it felt like. It felt like a lot of the meetings that were there when I first got there were in their adolescence. And so
Mm.
we created a new meeting, and that meeting grew, and that became my um, recovery family. And I started exploring ways to be more comfortable in myself.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I mean, it is a good thing to consider around meetings, in a way similar to churches too, on some level. But I mean, but with the 12-step meetings, I mean, there's meetings everywhere,
Right.
which is one of the great things about them. But picking a meeting is also like dating, and like you're not gonna ultimately bond with every person you date. I mean, you might have a couple really good connections, but you're probably gonna land somewhere, and it might take a while to really find who that somewhere is. And I was remarking the story you tell about trying to be the lone woman in a meeting of, like, big book thumping, older men. It was making me think about like authoritarian styles a little bit, which
Yeah.
I can imagine that coming up in a lot of church communities also. Like, not every there are some, well, so there's authoritarian power structures that show up, whether
Yeah.
it's
Absolutely.
your
Wherever
pastor,
you
your
are.
priest, your father, your sponsor, your mother, and it's just not conducive to attachment, not
Yeah.
conducive to a really loving, nurturing relationship. And how do we learn to be comfortable with ourselves?
Yeah.
We ideally we're given that through a relationship, ideally through our parents. Lots of us didn't have that, so ideally we find it as we go, as along the way. But like you're saying, sometimes, alcohol, weed, pornography, like, they get in there first, and they're
Yeah.
like, I'll be comforting, I'll be soothing for you, you don't need people.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Absolutely. I mean, and I love. Are you familiar with Gabor Mate?
yes.
Yeah, I love how he explains that it did serve its purpose. Those of us that suffered from trauma at a young age, we searched for a way to feel okay, and we found it, and it served its purpose. And so instead of saying, why that, it's more, okay, what purpose did it serve, and now what can we do? Because that has become the problem. That has the addiction has not stopped serving you. So again, it's going back to that thing. I want to find a life that I don't want to escape from, but
Mhm.
that takes deep work. That takes intense counseling. And you're talking about attachment. And for those of us that didn't get that attachment that is so necessary at that young age, yeah, we search for it through anything that we can find. And a lot of them are very unhealthy relationships and addiction. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, talking about this escape component, something like alcohol, something like pornography is like more what I work with on my end in my counseling practice. But they do a lot of things. At their core, they often are dissociative
Right.
or some sort of escape. Um, and I really like the way you talk about what sobriety has become for you is learning to be comfortable in your life, not needing to escape it, or we could say being present in your life.
Right.
And yeah, I wonder if you could say a little bit more like about that shift from trying to escape something, someone, mom, to now trying to pursue more fully inhabit something else.
Yeah. Thank you. It's for me, the thing that I found ironic is I was doing these workshops for kids, like I was talking about. And then a lot of the mothers came and said, I really want what you are doing with my kids. So a good friend and I started another set of workshops for women. And I was drinking through this. And I started drinking and looked at the irony of what I was communicating versus what I was doing, because we did meditation in the workshops. We explored creativity on so many different levels and how to really connect into that deepest self through creativity and about, being present with ourself. And yet, after each workshop, I'd go home and like, man, I need some wine. So that the irony of that of espousing something and then turning around and doing the opposite. Finally, just felt so hypocritical, think again of that parking lot in the church, that I had to say, this is not okay. This is really not okay. And so my first book, This Way Up, was a lot of the work from the workshops that I've been doing with the women. And the women had said they wanted something after the workshops. And I started writing the book. And it was while I was writing that book that I got sober the second time and just thought, yeah, the hypocrisy of this is too much. I want to embody those aspects of self that I am promoting. So a huge piece for me is through creativity, journaling especially. I'm a writer. I love words. So journaling a lot in my in my early second round of recovery, sketching, doing pottery, cooking, things where I was connecting to that deeper sense of self. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just that not the superficial connection to self, that outer self, that you talk about in this podcast, but that inner self. So finding that way to be connected, deeply connected to self.
Mhm.
And of course, through meditation, of course, through, really being able to sit deeply with myself. But for me, really the biggest tool that I was using was that creativity of moving into a place where I lost myself to find myself.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, me being a creative also, I really resonate with that really deeply. So I'm thinking of a scenario. So here's where I'd be curious your take on this. So a not too uncommon scenario. You say you get somebody, they're like a year, maybe two into their recovery work, and they're abstinent mostly for sure. And maybe even like doing some of the work, but it's just not feeling good, or there's a sense of like, I'm not really enjoying this. I'm not really sure. Do I really need this?
Mm,
Is this uh how important is this? Why is this so hard? Uh and because I observe this in a lot of people. They get to about like a year to 2 years in, and either their abstinence starts to falter a little bit, they start cutting some corners, or they're just like not thriving in it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Perfect. Yeah.
and then there are those people who seem to make it through that and get to be, 25, 30 years later, and they're like, yeah, that was really good. It was really good that I did this. Um, what would you offer to somebody in that first year or two doldrum?
Yeah, that the doldrum. God, that's a great question. I mean, for me, it was 12 years where I hit it and said, it's not doing it. Um, for me, so much of it is that feeling of I love your word thrive. So, and a lot of times you can't just say, so what makes you thrive? It's like, I don't know. It's like, okay, how, and we'll try meditation. I don't know. It's like working with anyone in early recovery. That is one of it. I usually, when I'm working with someone who is in early recovery and not thriving and reaching that doldrums and feeling of uh, it's not make I'm not on the pink cloud anymore. It's not making me feel as good anymore. And that craving for I want more of that what I felt in the beginning, or I want more what I felt when it was early days of being high before it got horrible. Um, I usually, for me, when I'm working with people, I will say, explore that in writing because that's who I am. But if someone says, I don't write, it's like, okay, well, let's explore it in another way. So I often will get, you know, cheap but larger canvases and say, choose some colors. Eh, Try and take that internal and externalize it. What is that churning mass of discomfort and ill ease, and how can we take it out and look at it? And for some people it really is that paint and saying, oh, it's this anger, or it's this smeary mud, or it's um, something like that, or they'll write and write about words that feel cramped, that feel stuck, that feel unalive. Um, and in my opinion, one has to explore in order to find that. And I can't explore for you. In my second book, In Recovery Road Trip, I talk about the protagonist taking a road trip to discover that, because that's exactly where the book starts, is that doldrums, is that it doesn't feel as good anymore. I,
Mhm.
I'm not getting that joy. I'm not getting that spark. I'm just not feeling it. I need something more. And that is so dangerous, as we know it in people in recovery, because that allure of that first drink, that first smoke, that first whatever that gives us that buzz, however long or however it hits you, becomes more and more alluring. And we know it's just right on the edge.
Mhm.
So that's what I recommend. Go explore. What does that exploration look like? In the book, it was a road trip and started meeting people and asking questions. I talk about exploring through journal writing because that's how it speaks to me. Exploring through color and paint, explore through, you know, music, explore through something that feels creative and enlivening, because only the person that's in that place can find it. As a counselor, you can recommend things. You can say, I'm right here with you, I believe in you. Ultimately, though, we have free choice, don't we?
We do, and there are limits to what I can do. I mean, I can step in as kind of that surrogate attachment figure,
Right.
and that's primarily what I do. Is I facilitate this experience of like attuned, healthy relationship space, that the kind that we need. But you're right. I mean, at some point, the person on the couch, they have to, of their own volition, do their own exploration. And if they can access these artistic mediums, that's really wonderful. And some people do, and some people will go some other routes too. But like however you do it, it's like you said, like you have to enter your own inner world. You have to feel your own feelings. Think, notice your own thoughts. You have to feel your pain at some point,
You have to.
and that's just I mean, I like in recovery, I use the gym and exercise metaphor a lot, where, you know, I maybe there's some crazy people that just like always love the gym, but like probably most of us like don't always like enjoy being in the gym, or like the feeling of like straining our muscles. Like
Right.
it's work, it's pain, it's exertion, it's uncomfortable effort. And we reap the benefits sometimes really quickly. But there's always that initial moment of like, I don't want to do this. It's
Don't
not
want to do
comfortable.
this. Yeah.
Uh, and emotionally, there's a lot of moments like that too, where we're just like, I'm feeling lonely and I just have to let that feeling be, or I'm feeling like bored and understimulated for the next 10 minutes while I wait for something. Like I need to just like not reach for my phone and maybe just like feel my breath a little bit, and
Yeah.
then do that a lot of
And
times.
that's so, I mean, I think it's a lot easier for me and my generation because we did not grow up with internet and cell phones. But shit, with people that do and have and were brought up with it, uh, our brains are now programmed for that absolute instant gratification. And you were talking about dealing with porn addiction. I mean, that's so huge, and there is that gratification, and you can get it that fast, and
Mhm.
it does become just overwhelming. I had someone come to me with that, and I just said, I am sorry, I am not the person, because I haven't had the experience. I can't give you my experience, strength, and hope around this one. I'm happy to talk about my experience, strength, and hope in other areas, but there, you need to find someone that has some experience, strength, and hope on that can deal with it more, because it really is it's taken addiction to a whole new level. um all of this, that's our brains weren't set up for it, you know and when I read the latest research on how kids' brains are changing because of that, constant feedback and gratification. And as a teacher, I've seen it. Kids don't stand still. They don't want to be read to. They have a hard time, sitting down for lessons. And so our brains are adapting. We're great
Mhm.
adaptive animals, but damn.
Yeah, we are marvelously adaptive and really darn good at at
Yeah.
surviving stuff, and usually not in great ways. So uh, yeah, pursuing recovery, or pursuing sobriety, pursuing this lifestyle that's very based in being present and being connected. Uh, you know, often in a very gentle sort of way. I mean, our culture is just so fast and so loud and so disconnected and so like hyper individualistic. So there's like these inner challenges of like I have to like detox and allow that, and then I have to also like sustain this in a world that's not really set up for it.
No,
So
it's not.
yeah.
And that's, I mean, talking about that just so well put. Detoxing first from whatever it was, and then having to survive in this world that promotes alcohol, that promotes internet, that promotes porn in a backhanded way, in a way, most comics, etc., that will talk about it. Yeah, I mean, exactly what I'm saying.
Hmm.
And the promotion of that lifestyle that is disconnected. And yet, when you read any studies about what brings true happiness, true satisfaction to human beings, it is connection
Hmm.
above all else. And yet, when we are running on that immediate, snap my synapses for me now, we don't connect. We just don't.
Yeah. So you're starting to answer a question I was going to ask about why do we need meetings, or like I might somebody pursuing a faith might ask, well, why do I need to go to church? Why can't I just watch the sermon on YouTube at home? Uh, why do I need to go to a meeting? Why can't I just read the big book, or not read the big book but just journal a bunch, like
Or just say the third step prayer every
just say
morning.
the Thursday? Yeah, yeah. Why do we need to actually get with people, do you think?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question, and I am a walking example of it because I quit going to meetings in my small town in New Zealand, and I said I'm fine. Read, I had this many recovery books. I knew people in recovery, but I not in the town I was in. And then Zoom happened, I mean, with the pandemic, then Zoom happened. And although that serves a beautiful purpose, and I'm grateful beyond measure for what it has given us, it's also disconnected us again, right? How many times when I know I'm going off on a tangent again, and I apologize, I will get back to meetings, but I'm watching people on Zoom meetings looking at their phones. So they're on the Zoom meeting, they're muted, and I can see them either playing a game on their phone or answering texts or scrolling through a social media, and yet they're at the meeting, but they're disconnected. And it's blatant, and you watch it, anyway. So why do we need meetings? I love the quote by Johann Hari that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection, and that we need the connection, and that we are programmed for connection. And the studies in positive psychology and brain studies talk about that deep fundamental need for connection. The happiest people on earth, in the blue zones and elsewhere, that live the longest, that are the healthiest, are the ones with connection. And that we crave it, and yet we'll hide from it through whatever. It feels too hard. It's too hard to connect. I've got to be authentic. I've got to be vulnerable. It's too hard to connect. Let me just stay home and watch a video. It's so much easier. Or scroll on social media. And I mean, we've all done it. And I'm not saying it's bad, and with the rise of anxiety levels, and people's things that happened during and after the pandemic. I mean, I get it, and yet we need meetings. We've got to have that connection. We've got to have that community. And without it, we start to shrivel. We don't, as you put it, we don't thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And um, one of the other things I like to explore is really looking at sobriety as its own really like distinct way of life. Like the way like many faith traditions will also say, like, we're living in a really distinct way than the world around us, and it affects how we act, how we think, how we love. I would say even how we fail, how we handle our money, and everything. And so like exploring, well, what is the sober way of life? It sounds like we're landing on, well, a major part of that is we're people who we seek connection. Not that we don't ever do solitude or do stuff alone, but we routinely seek to get back with a person, with a group of people, perhaps. So
Yeah, that's there's a couple of things that jump out when you ask that. One of them, and I repeat this a lot. Aside from the 12 steps, which I practice the 12 steps, the one of the slogans that kind of exemplifies how one of the ways that I try to lead my life is keeping my side of the street clean. In addiction, and even when I wasn't practicing my addiction, but I wasn't in recovery, I did not seek to keep my side of the street clean. I sought to not get blamed for things. In my family of origin, I was a mascot. I was a peacekeeper, and I dance around things so I didn't get blamed, because someone always has to be for blame, right? I mean, there's always someone to blame. So keeping my side of the street clean, I think, is exemplary to a clean and sober way of life for me. That I am going to walk in this earth owning my stuff, cleaning up my stuff, and being present for that, whatever that looks like. And sometimes it pisses me off when the other person doesn't keep their side of the street clean. And I want to say, this isn't fair. This isn't there. I'm doing it anyway. So that's important, and part of that too is honesty and being present for the world. Actually, when things happen, when shit happens, when uncomfortable things happen, being present for it and not hiding from it and actually walking through it. And it's not fun, but it is life and it is exhilarating even when it's painful because we are experiencing, not just existing in it. We are experiencing life.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding that connection when we are. If I'm going to walk through this shit, if I'm going to walk through stuff that is really painful and hard, I want someone to hold me and someone to say it's tough. It's tough. I don't want them to do it for me. I don't want them to congratulate me. I want them to hold me when I need being held and whatever that looks like. Um, so yeah, that connection, that vulnerability and honesty, and that absolute responsibility and it's like making the when we get clean and sober, we make an agreement to do life in the best way we can on life's terms.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if I'm keeping my side of the street clean, it's not only when I can absolutely control it, which I did try to do. I was great codependent for a while in early sobriety, but anyway, where I want to control everything because then I can keep my side of the street clean, really clean because I'm controlling absolutely everything, and that doesn't work either. So yeah, really that being present, that connection, being honest, being responsible in a world where shit, look at politics right now. That's not who's winning. That's not who's winning without getting political here. The guys who are winning right now aren't keeping their side of the street clean and they're not practicing responsibility and honesty and they're buying their way out. And man, when we're trying to say this is a good way of doing it, and it's kind of hard to argue sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get politics either, but I could speculate that there's something very non-glamorous about what you're talking about. Like, it's not exciting to be virtuous and moral and to be like the common gentle person. Like in the drug sense, like you don't get a dopamine rush out of being kind,
Right. Yeah.
usually,
Well, you
or
can a little, yeah, a little,
maybe a little bit,
yeah,
yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
yeah. But it's not like euphoric and thrilling to like take ownership and be like, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Like you'll never get a dopamine rush out of that.
No.
As much as you will be like healing your soul, saving yourself, and like doing so much good work through that, it's not as exciting. So it maybe doesn't get the same hype. But I'm hearing what you're saying and really really loving it as talking about what is a sober life, who is a sober person, like down to the core, down to the fundamental core. And it sounds like one I mean, it takes a lot of courage, I think, to take responsibility and to be able to admit like here's a limit that I have, here's a wrong that I did, here's something that's not actually my responsibility, it's yours. So yeah, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of work to do this.
Yeah, it does take a lot of courage and a lot of courage to be living this lifestyle in a culture that promotes addiction insanely. It's like reading any of Brene Brown's work. It's like that the lifestyle we're choosing is incredibly courageous, incredibly courageous. And I love the idea that to be choosing this lifestyle is being a rebel. We are rebellious. And I like that because I was always like a little rebel as a teenager, so I want to still be that rebel and do it in a way like, yeah, I'm not drinking and I'm not using, and I am out there being as present as I can. And I find this as an act of rebellion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my faith tradition, there's a really strong component of asceticism, and often when we look at the lives of our great saints, we'll talk about their ascetic labors as like spiritual violence, essentially, done to the dark powers. So there's something there. I'd be curious. to hear a little bit more about women in this. I know that's been a big part of your work and
Mm,
your focus, and something you've really considered a lot is like what's been the woman's experience in recovery and trying to navigate meetings and everything.
yeah,
And for the woman in recovery or considering her recovery or just like considering the inner life, what are some what would you have for her for like wisdom, encouragement, or warnings or
yeah.
anything?
Well, and that is a great question. And um, my second book, Recovery Road Trip, was born of interviewing women who who relapsed. Specifically, I interviewed, I want to say hundreds, but maybe that's an exaggeration. It felt like hundreds. I was taking a lot of notes and getting a lot of information from women. And invariably, there was a feeling of um, being in a patriarchal system, not feeling heard, not feeling seen, not feeling supported in an emotional way. As a general rule, not always, but as a general rule, women are more emotional. One of the reasons I stopped going to those meetings, the small, there weren't any choices in the small town. I was in a town of 7,000 people, and there were 2 meetings a week, and they were all the same people. And, they were telling me, don't be emotional. Don't pick up, come to meetings, you'll be fine, but I'm not fine. I'm not, and you're not hearing me. And so that was a real common thread, was not finding that connection, right? And not that, especially with women that, they found the pink glow when they first got sober or they first got clean, and then sort of were losing it, and then didn't find anyone that wanted to work with them on emotional sobriety and what that looks like and what that connection is. And so your question was, what would you say to women that are experiencing this? And the first thing I'd say is, go explore what that looks like for you, because I can't do it for you. But nowadays, for better or worse, after the pandemic, you can find a meeting 24 hours a day anywhere in the world. In New Zealand, if when whatever time of day or night you're awake, there's going to be a meeting somewhere in the world. So had that been an option, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not saying it would have been different, but it could have been. If instead of just going to the same meetings and feeling like I was getting beaten up for being too emotional, which I was
Mhm.
told, if I could have hooked on and gone to a meeting somewhere else that was a women's meeting, where women were saying, cry, yeah, get it out. There's a lot to cry about. There's a lot of pain. Be there, be with it, instead of shut up. That that's immense. And so, like you said, it's like dating. It's like, a lot of things. It's not, each one isn't going to match you. Find the one that does. Find the meeting that does. And for me, a meeting that really spoke to me was a multi-addiction meeting, one that talks about all addictions, ones that welcome codependents as well as meth addicts, as well as alcoholics, as well as sex addicts. And they get together and they say, what brought me here? What am I looking for? I am looking for connection. I may not be able to give you my experience, strength, and hope around your pornography addiction on the internet, but I can give you connection, and I will listen, and I will talk to you about my addiction,
Mm.
and I will talk about my gaping hole that I had that I tried to fill.
So this is a new thing for me. So I knew that there were meetings for like everything you could imagine, but I had not ever heard of a multi-addiction meeting all in one. Those
Yeah.
are a thing?
We started it. That
Oh,
was the
okay.
meeting that, no, we didn't start the whole thing. No, but that we started that in New Zealand, and
Okay.
said we wanted to welcome everyone that is suffering from any addiction, because instead of being told, there's where you go for alcoholism, there's where you go for pot, there's where you go for sex. And no, they exist online, and they exist in bigger cities. Absolutely. And
Okay.
welcoming anyone from any addiction that's seeking to fill that giant dark hole with whatever they're putting in, because they've got that giant dark hole.
Oh, I love that so much. I might have to. Yeah. Uh, I'd like to go to a meeting like that. That's very much like how my practice is built on working with we talk called the addiction interaction, like the cluster of stuff we get
Yeah,
involved in. Um, but it's seeming like, and you can let me know what you think about this. It seems like in a meeting like that, you would very quickly learn. It seems like a meeting like that would really emphasize here's how we're similar and how we're
yeah.
whereas if it's like, well, I talk about my cocaine use over there and my alcohol over there and my under earning over there, like they might more emphasize how we're different from each other.
Exactly, exactly. Where the core issue is the same.
Yeah.
The core issue, we're trying to fill that hole. So the first place I found it, Reese, was in Double Winners. Have you heard of Double Winners groups?
No.
Okay, well, that's Al Anon and AA. But what happened was that other people were coming in that had alcohol and codependence issues, but also were identifying themselves as shopaholics and and as debtors. And Screen came in, and then quietly in a corner, someone would talk about sex addiction with which often walks hand in hand with codependence, and then it, they would start to unfold and say, how many of these can I talk about? Because most of us are addicts, and what got me pissed off is when I identified myself as an addict in an AA meeting and they said, this is an alcoholics meeting. And I said, alcoholism is an addiction. Alcohol is the substance that you're addicted to.
Right.
Oh, so that's where I first heard about it, was in a Double Winners. And then we started this meeting. It's under the cloak of NA, but we talk about all addiction, and people talked about coming in with lots and lots of addictions. And that's what we're doing right now. When I moved to Portugal, I got online and I said, I'm living in northern Portugal. Is there anybody in recovery? Not exactly anonymous, but it's sort of like you got to find what you got to find.
Uh-huh.
And there were several of us. We got together. We're creating an English speaking meeting, and it's open to anyone with any addiction, any kind, anywhere, where you're looking for that connection to
Hmm.
get past the addiction, which is the giant hole that we're all trying to fill with inappropriate substances and actions.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. I have some challenges with how language is used in the recovery community, and like alcoholic addict, yes, they should find the same they should be welcome in the same meeting because
You'd think,
you think, yeah, right. Um, yeah, I mean, I really love the idea of being able to say, like, here's a meeting. I have this central challenge. I have this bonding issue, and I bond to things that aren't good for me, and I do them too much.
Yeah,
Whatever it
exactly. I
is.
mean, that's it. That's the core issue. I bond to things that hurt me instead of help me.
Yeah.
And they're really fucking up my life majorly. And I really need help changing this.
Right.
Eh,
Yeah.
Fill in the blank. I'm shopping too much. I have no money. I'm end up with guys that are horrible to me because I'm looking for that connection.
Hmm.
I'm drinking myself into blackout because I don't like my life. I'm, fill in the blank.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it's good to emphasize, like you're saying, like one of the central cures. I mean, that's also not the best language to use for this necessarily, but like you're saying, like we bond to these things that hurt us, when what we really need to be doing is bonding with people, or bonding with our higher power through the experience of bonding with people, and a lot of that is emotional.
Yeah,
When I can bring out my emotions, when I can bring out my inner life, when I can bring out my struggles and my interests and my dreams, and those are welcome, then there's room for, okay, now we can connect, now we can be together, we can be present, and labor together. Um, which, like, we're
exactly.
noticing is very, it is a form of rebellion in the way pop culture, politics,
Oh,
media
yeah.
works.
Oh, yeah.
So
Completely. And when we talk about it, like we're talking about it right now, it's so simplistic. It's so obvious that it's sort of like, why is this so difficult to understand. And why is there so much fear around it? Which is what I get in a lot of 12-step rooms that say, no, this is for alcoholics only. What are you afraid of here? You know, this guy over here that, has stopped using heroin, he may look worse than you with your suit and tie, maybe not, but what is the fear behind it? Do you see yourself too similarly? I mean, I don't know. I struggle with that. I really do, because to me it's like we're all looking for that connection. Literally, how are we connected? And to me, it's pretty obvious that alcoholism and addiction. Yeah, there's a strong connection there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Um, yeah, thank you. So Recovery Road, or Recovery Road Trip is your newest book,
Yes,
and it comes out of the experience of women who have relapsed.
yes.
Women who have relapsed and then picked up recovery work again, or
Yes, most of them have picked up recovery work, but not all in 12-step.
okay, okay.
There was quite a few women that felt alienated in the patriarchy of 12-step, which makes sense. I get it. Um, there's a wonderful book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, called "Quit Like a Woman"
I
with
haven't.
Holly Whitaker. Oh, it's a great book. If you have any women that are struggling with the patriarchy and the sort of old language of that, "Quit Like a Woman's" great. Um, and so some women looking for a different path than 12-step, or a women's way through the 12 steps, or just finding a way. My own experience, and I believe this to be true with most people that are looking for recovery, is it is a spiritual program. So you may struggle with the way you were brought up, like I did with Catholicism. You may struggle with organized religion. You may struggle with whatever, but I believe with that dark hole that we all were trying to fill, that it's a spiritual problem. And therefore, finding some spiritual path through it is, I think, is necessary. Um, so a lot of the women that relapsed found their way at, into a clean and healthy lifestyle without doing a typical 12-step recovery, through different ways, but almost all of them found some kind of spirituality, whatever that looked like.
Yeah, yeah. Finding their own unique way, finding a spiritual practice that worked for them, that they could approach and grow in, and then just persisting in that.
Yeah,
Um, that makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, I'm noticing too. Let's see. I was really excited talking about the multi addiction meeting, and the way we're kind of pinpointing there's this universality to it, and a lot of ways that we're maybe more similar. But I do appreciate also getting to kind of balance that with a sense of like, and there are some ways that we are different, and the woman's experience is different than the man's experience. They instinctively need different things at the starting point. I mean, men need to get emotional also. Let's be real.
right, right,
But it's not necessarily the most felt on top need for men all of the time. Whereas for women, it's more on top more of the time, more quickly, and so
right.
being able to, if we want to serve women, support women, I'm hearing that's a really major component of that is we gotta hear a women and what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're needing, and not be
Yeah.
offended by it or overwhelmed by it.
Right. And you see, I'm a I mean, I love coeducational meetings as well. I think there's some beautiful, rich sharing, but I think there's really a place for a men's meeting and a women's meeting, and with a men's meeting, finding a man that can help to nurture a men's meeting, so that my experience has been that so many men lean on women to explore any kind of emotion, because with that discomfort, I can be with my partner and have her, I can either express it to her and her alone, or she can help me this. And I see that a lot in recovery. And, I mean, there, of course, there's, there's the agreement that men and women don't get together in their first year because we fall into old habits. But there's, I think a lot of women may get more emotional in a women's only meeting, but that has to be emphasized for men too, to explore that. And and then with a co-op, with a co-educational meeting, just allowing the interaction of all, really not pigeonholing, I guess. And then also 13th stepping, that was one of the things that so many women talked about that relapsed, is like they just got tired of being hit on, and that happens.
Yeah, yeah, it's a funny thing. As much as relationships are wonderful and essential, there's also a way that like a particular kind of relationship can be really distracting, or
Yeah.
uh, so it's like all things to be done with wisdom and decently and
and
in
and
order.
and discernment, it's
Right.
sort of like that feeling of, I want connection really bad, I'll take you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But when we can slow down and recognize, well, I mean, it's like you were saying at the beginning, like what you wanted to be comfortable with yourself and like have a life that you didn't need to escape, and like I would imagine that someone who gets to that zone would be comfortable enough to wait a little bit before getting into a new relationship, or wouldn't need to just like desperately grab the first person who breathes.
right.
But they're comfortable in themselves to be like, okay, I might be okay on my own for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year,
Right.
while I figure stuff out, and then I can make a slow move towards someone, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, Patty, I really appreciate, your story and your work, and you bring in attention to a lot of these issues. And I was really excited to hear about like the workshops you put together, and that sort of investment in women and children and in the
Mm,
recovery community. It's really great, and I appreciate your work.
thank you.
Yeah. Uh, so if a listener wanted to follow your work a little bit more, you said you have a couple of books, and uh, where else are you on the internet?
Oh, unfortunately, I'm all over the place. um,
Okay.
you can find me on my website, which is patticlark.org. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky, um, and Threads as Patti Clark Writer. And I have my own YouTube channel, because in both of my books, I do meditations in the book, but I give a link to my YouTube channel so you can be led through a visualization and meditation. And that's, I think it's just at Patti Clark, maybe at Patti Clark one, or Patti Clark This Way Up, I think is how it originally came in. Um, and yeah, if you look on patticlark.org, that's got my connection to everything else. And my book's available on Simon and Schuster.
Okay. Cool deal. Yeah, I think on YouTube I just entered your name and you came up like really, really fast. So
Oh, good. Thank you. That's good to
yeah, yeah.
know.
So you've mastered the algorithm. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and so that's where you can visit Patty Clark, and I think you should visit her there, unless you happen to be in Portugal, in which case, wow, good for you. Have fun.
And
Um,
if you are, get a hold of me and I'll show you the meeting, because
right. Oh,
yeah,
that sounds super
there's
good.
several of them. Yeah.
Nice. Yes. And then on my end, please, if you're needing counseling services for mental health or recovery work in the state of Oregon, you can go to newpatterncounseling.com. And if you like the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/outer circle and support us there. And that would be very nice.
Great.
But thank you again, Patty. And I hope you have wonderful travels, and appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Reese. It was wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed it. An hour just flew.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.